I am Bethany, a 25-year-old woman who just wanted to earn a decent living for my family. I came home exactly 5 minutes late because I had to work an exhausting overtime shift to pay the bills. Instead of a warm welcome, I discovered that my parents had ruthlessly locked the main entrance from the inside. I desperately knocked on the wooden panels while begging my parents to open up, hoping it was just a simple misunderstanding. The only response I received was the heavy sound of footsteps approaching the other side of the door. My brother stood there without opening the lock, coldly delivering a sentence that shattered my illusion of family. "It is your fault. Even if you disappear, no one will care." Rather than breaking down into loud sobs or screaming frantically to demand their mercy, I slowly sank to the freezing hallway floor. I pulled my knees to my chest while forcing my exhausted brain to process their bizarre hostility. Staring into the quiet darkness, I realized this sudden rejection was not merely a spontaneous burst of anger over my slight tardiness. It was clearly the beginning of a meticulously calculated scheme designed to permanently force me out of the very home I helped maintain. A dangerous clarity washed over my mind as I silently formed an unexpected plan for a devastating legal counterattack. I knew exactly what I needed to do at 9 o'clock the following morning to make them deeply regret their unforgivable cruelty. If you want to discover how I turned this humiliating night into the ultimate revenge, a freezing draft slipping through the hallway window abruptly jolted me awake, just as the grandfather clock struck 3 in the morning. I cautiously pressed my body against the locked wooden door while holding my breath to listen to the muffled voices coming from the living room. My parents were sitting up late into the night having a secret discussion with Jared that sounded incredibly urgent despite the late hour. Instead of walking away or confronting them immediately, I crouched lower to the ground to catch every single word of their deceitful conversation. The walls of the old house were thin enough for me to hear my father speak in a hushed but demanding tone regarding some urgent paperwork. "We need to finalize the transfer papers before she figures out the actual value of the trust fund," he whispered nervously. Hearing those specific words sent a sudden shockwave of realization crashing directly into my exhausted brain as I struggled to process the magnitude of his statement. My mother immediately responded with a sigh of relief while shuffling what sounded like heavy legal documents on the coffee table. "We managed to keep the paperwork hidden all these years, so she has no idea the money even exists," she admitted coldly. I stood there paralyzed as the horrifying truth washed over me that the massive trust fund left by my grandfather was entirely in my name. Jared scoffed loudly before leaning back in his chair to selfishly complain about the upcoming wedding expenses he expected them to cover without question. "Just make sure you drain enough cash from that account to pay for my destination wedding without triggering any bank alerts," Jared demanded arrogantly. My father quickly assured him that the legal loophole they recently discovered would allow them to extract the funds completely unnoticed by the authorities. They were frantically plotting to manipulate the legal system to steal my rightful inheritance, simply to fund his lavish lifestyle and upcoming marriage. At the exact same time, they were shamelessly forcing me to work grueling overtime shifts just to pay for their daily household utility bills. A suffocating wave of pure resentment expanded in my chest as the depth of their financial exploitation finally became undeniably clear. I had spent my entire adult life believing we were struggling financially while constantly sacrificing my own personal dreams to support the family. The bitter reality was that they viewed me merely as a convenient financial tool to be thoroughly exploited until absolutely nothing remained of my efforts. Instead of bursting into the living room in a fit of hysterical rage, I forced myself to swallow the burning betrayal to maintain my strategic advantage. I consciously chose to suppress my raging emotions because throwing a dramatic tantrum would only give them the opportunity to destroy the evidence. Retreating slowly back to my cold spot on the hallway floor, my mind began connecting all the suspicious clues from the past decade. I vividly remembered those moments when my parents pressured me to blindly sign confusing financial documents without allowing me to read the fine print. Since I recently turned 25 years old, the legal restrictions on the trust had likely expired, prompting their sudden rush to steal the assets. They severely underestimated my intelligence by falsely assuming I would forever remain their obedient little worker bee who never dared to question their absolute authority. Staring into the shadows of the silent house, I made a solemn vow to meticulously strip them of everything they tried to steal from me. I would patiently wait for the sun to rise before initiating a flawless legal counterattack that would leave them completely bankrupt and entirely exposed. Exactly at 9 o'clock the next morning, as the first rays of sunlight illuminated the quiet streets of Overland Park, I stood determinedly before the local bank entrance. Pushing through the heavy glass doors without a single ounce of hesitation, I approached the nearest available teller to demand a comprehensive review of my entire financial history. The polite employee asked for my identification before bringing up the restricted files containing the detailed records of my hidden inheritance. Staring intently at the glowing computer monitor, my heart pounded violently against my ribs as the undeniable proof of their betrayal materialized right before my eyes. Massive sums of money had already been systematically siphoned from the trust fund over the past several months without my knowledge. The printed statements clearly revealed a consistent pattern of unauthorized transfers being routed directly into joint accounts, controlled entirely by my greedy parents. My hands trembled slightly while holding the damning documents, but the overwhelming sense of betrayal quickly transformed into a cold and calculating fury. Refusing to let my family steal another dime from the legacy my grandfather intended for my future, I leaned closer to the counter with absolute resolve. Looking directly into the eyes of the bewildered bank teller, I delivered my instructions with an unyielding tone of absolute authority. Please sever all their access, cancel every single secondary card linked to this account, and freeze the automatic payments immediately. I commanded firmly. The experienced teller sensed the severity of my situation immediately, while her fingers began flying rapidly across her computer keyboard to execute my urgent directives. Watching the screen refresh with the updated security protocols brought an immense wave of satisfaction that temporarily replaced the lingering exhaustion from the previous night. She paused for a brief moment to verify the system changes before looking back up at me with a reassuring nod of professional confirmation. Yes, ma'am, all linked credit cards have been securely locked, and the entire account is fully frozen as requested. The teller confirmed clearly. Knowing that my parents would soon face an abrupt and humiliating financial crisis gave me the exact motivation required to proceed with the next phase. Stepping out of the bank with a newly acquired sense of power, I drove straight toward the county records office located downtown. Navigating the bureaucratic maze of the government building required patience, but my determination to secure the ultimate legal weapons kept my mind razor-sharp. Approaching the clerk at the archives department, I officially requested certified copies of the original trust documents established by my late relative years ago. Receiving the thick folder containing the legally binding papers felt like holding a loaded weapon specifically designed to obliterate their intricate web of lies. I carefully placed the crucial evidence inside my leather briefcase, knowing these undeniable facts would serve as the cornerstone of my impending legal battle. Returning to the house around noon, I deliberately smoothed my features into an expression of exhausting defeat to perfectly play the role of the obedient daughter. My mother was sitting comfortably in the living room flipping through a magazine, completely unaware that the financial ground beneath her feet had just collapsed entirely. Jared walked out of the kitchen with a smug smirk plastered across his face, tossing a sarcastic insult about my wrinkled clothes without missing a beat. Enduring his pathetic mockery was surprisingly easy now that I possessed the concrete evidence needed to permanently evict him from his unearned, comfortable lifestyle. I silently began cleaning the kitchen counters with my head bowed purposefully, lulling them into a false sense of absolute security before the incoming storm finally hit. On Monday morning, carrying the thick folder of documents alongside the freshly printed banking evidence, I stepped confidently into a luxurious office situated directly in the heart of downtown. Taking a deep breath to steady my nerves against the magnitude of my decision, I sat opposite my lawyer, Mr. Harrison, across a massive mahogany desk. Opening the leather briefcase with deliberate precision, I meticulously detailed the intricate plot to steal the massive trust fund while laying out the undeniable proof of embezzlement. The comprehensive financial timeline clearly demonstrated exactly how my parents, alongside Jared, were secretly draining the assets entirely behind my back for their own selfish gain. Harrison carefully flipped through every single page of the printed bank statements while a deep frown slowly formed across his experienced forehead. Analyzing the unauthorized transfer receipts alongside the forged authorization forms, the seasoned attorney quickly grasped the immense severity of the fraudulent activity taking place. He placed the papers down on the polished wood before looking up at me with an incredibly serious expression to deliver a stark professional warning. Are you absolutely sure you want to go through with this aggressive legal action because this specific violation of the trust fund could easily send them to prison? Harrison asked firmly. Meeting his intense gaze without a single ounce of hesitation or lingering pity for the people who ruthlessly exploited my hard work, I straightened my posture. The agonizing memories of sleeping on a freezing hallway floor hardened my resolve against any foolish thoughts of extending unearned forgiveness. Maintaining absolute eye contact with the legal expert sitting across from me, I delivered my response in a clear and unwavering tone of voice. They deliberately chose stolen money over family loyalty, so I will gladly show them the devastating consequences of their bottomless greed without an ounce of mercy, I answered boldly. Recognizing the unshakable determination radiating from my demeanor, Harrison immediately shifted his focus toward his computer keyboard to begin drafting the necessary legal documents. He worked rapidly to prepare an urgent legal notice demanding the immediate sealing of all related financial assets to prevent any further unauthorized withdrawals by the culprits. Watching the formal complaint take shape on his monitor provided a deep sense of validation that my years of silent suffering were finally coming to an end. Seizing the momentum of the situation, I firmly instructed him to simultaneously prepare an official eviction notice targeting every single person currently residing inside my property. The property legally belonged to me through the inheritance, meaning they were essentially trespassing while plotting to strip me of my rightful financial independence. Harrison assured me the paperwork would be finalized swiftly before being delivered by a certified process server to maximize the psychological impact on my abusers. Securing these aggressive legal measures guaranteed my toxic relatives would face an inescapable wall of justice the moment they realized their access to the funds had vanished. Gathering my belongings with a steady hand, I formally thanked him for his prompt professional assistance before heading back toward the busy city streets outside the building. Stepping out of the sophisticated law office into the cool morning breeze, an unprecedented surge of power coursed vigorously through my entire body. The heavy burden of being an obedient victim had finally lifted from my shoulders to be replaced by the thrilling anticipation of their impending downfall. Knowing my recent visit to the local bank had already neutralized their credit cards gave me a profound sense of satisfaction that completely validated my difficult choices. That single calculated financial strike would undoubtedly plunge that toxic family into a terrible financial crisis before this current week even came to an end. On Wednesday afternoon, dark clouds began covering the Kansas sky as I arranged to meet a special person at a quiet suburban cafe. Taking a seat at a secluded corner table away from the windows, I finally reunited with my best friend Gwen to share my hidden nightmare. She was the only person in my life who consistently provided me with genuine emotional comfort during my darkest moments of absolute despair. Stirring my coffee with a trembling hand, I poured out the entire cruel truth regarding the massive trust fund my family had systematically stolen. Detailing the horrifying extent of their financial manipulation to someone who actually cared about my well-being felt incredibly liberating after carrying the heavy burden alone. Explaining how they forced me to pay their daily utility bills while secretly plotting to finance an extravagant wedding truly exposed the depths of their depravity. Hearing how my own relatives ruthlessly exploited my hard work for years caused a visible wave of pure fury to wash over her expressive face. Unable to hide her overwhelming indignation regarding their deceitful actions, she reached across the small wooden table to firmly grasp both of my hands. Looking directly into my eyes with a fierce determination that mirrored my own internal resolve, she delivered her unwavering support in a passionate tone. "You cannot let those toxic people continue to trample all over you like this. I will help you pack your belongings and leave that hellhole today," Gwen declared fiercely. Watching the genuine anger flash across her features gave me the profound validation I desperately needed to confirm that my aggressive retaliation was completely justified. Hearing her fierce loyalty wrap around my wounded spirit like a protective shield gave me the exact push needed to finalize my escape plan. I offered her a bitter smile while gently squeezing her warm hands in return to silently convey my deep appreciation for her unwavering friendship. "I have already prepared absolutely everything for my departure. Now we just wait to see how panicked they become when they have 0 pennies left," I replied confidently. Thanks to her enthusiastic assistance navigating the local real estate listings, I quickly managed to secure a highly protected serviced apartment situated across town. We deliberately waited until my parents left the suburban house for their respective daily errands before executing the physical extraction phase of my revenge. Driving a rented moving truck directly into the empty driveway, we efficiently sneaked inside to gather all my personal identification documents, plus my most cherished keepsakes. We purposefully left the heavy furniture plus my older clothes behind to maintain the deceptive illusion that I was still blindly residing under their toxic roof. Ensuring my bedroom looked exactly the same as I left it that morning would grant me the critical element of surprise during our upcoming family dinner. While carefully carrying the final cardboard box of my valuable possessions toward the waiting vehicle, my cell phone suddenly began vibrating violently inside my jacket pocket. Pulling the device out to check the glowing screen, I saw a massive barrage of automated transaction error notifications flooding my primary email inbox. The banking system was frantically alerting me that the secondary credit cards held by my parents were being repeatedly declined at various luxury retail stores. Staring at the beautiful cascade of rejected payment alerts provided undeniable proof that they were finally experiencing the terrifying reality of my financial blockade. Knowing they were currently standing at cash registers facing ultimate public humiliation, while realizing their stolen funds had vanished, brought a victorious smirk to my face. Locking the front door of that house for the very last time, I drove away toward my secure new life without shedding a single tear. On Friday evening, the atmosphere inside the old house felt suffocatingly tense as I stepped through the main door and headed straight into the dining room. My parents were sitting around the large wooden table alongside my brother's fiancée Sierra, looking incredibly panicked due to the recent financial blockade. The visible extreme stress radiating from their exhausted faces clearly indicated that their various credit cards had been repeatedly declined for their severely overdue luxury bills. Jared suddenly slammed his heavy palm aggressively against the tabletop while glaring directly at me with eyes full of malicious hatred and unearned entitlement. He immediately raised his voice to an intimidating volume to violently demand immediate answers regarding his ruined financial transactions during his busy afternoon. "What the hell did you do to the bank accounts because I could not swipe the card to pay the expensive deposit for the wedding venue?" Jared shouted furiously. Crossing my arms firmly over my chest to establish a physical barrier against his aggression, I stared directly into the eyes of my lifelong abuser. I refused to show even a tiny fraction of the paralyzing fear that used to control my actions whenever he raised his voice in the past. I am simply stopping all my financial payments for the greedy people who are actively trying to steal my inherited trust fund money, I replied coldly, refusing to give them a single second to process the devastating reality of my blunt statement. I quickly reached inside my sturdy leather bag. Pulling out the thick legal folder bearing the intimidating red stamp of the local court prepared by Harrison, I threw it forcefully onto the center of the dining table. The heavy slapping sound of the massive document hitting the solid wood instantly silenced their chaotic protests and plunged the entire room into absolute terrifying fear. Standing tall with an overwhelming sense of long-awaited vindication, I loudly declared my absolute legal ownership over the massive trust fund left behind by my late relative. I aggressively pointed at the official paperwork resting right in front of them, while officially serving the formal eviction notice mandated by the strict state authorities. Delivering the final crushing blow to their parasitic existence under my roof, I demanded that they completely vacate my property within exactly 14 days. I made it perfectly clear that failing to remove their belongings within the strict deadline would result in immediate police intervention to physically remove them. The arrogant expression previously painted across my father's face rapidly morphed from furious anger into a sickly ashen pale color driven by pure, unadulterated terror. My mother instinctively clamped her shaking hands over her mouth while staring at the legal eviction mandate as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. She finally understood that the deceptive illusion they had carefully maintained for decades was permanently shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces right before her eyes. Meanwhile, Sierra physically took several steps backward away from the table, while her confused eyes darted nervously between Jared and the damning legal evidence. The horrifying realization finally dawned upon her terrified features that this supposedly wealthy family was actually entirely fake from the very beginning. She visibly recoiled in utter disgust upon discovering that her future husband was currently standing on the absolute verge of complete bankruptcy and potential criminal charges. The crushing weight of the undeniable truth hung heavily in the suffocating dining room as they collectively realized my blind financial obedience had permanently disappeared forever. Watching their pathetic attempts to formulate a coherent excuse provided me with an incredible rush of adrenaline that completely erased years of my silent suffering. At 10 o'clock the following morning, the cell phone resting on the sturdy wooden desk inside my secure new apartment suddenly vibrated with a completely unfamiliar caller identification number. Picking up the ringing device with mild curiosity, the person speaking on the other end of the line was Sierra using a violently trembling voice filled with absolute terror. She tearfully confessed that immediately following the explosive dining room confrontation last night, Jared had cowardly attempted to push all the impending legal responsibilities entirely onto her shoulders. Instead of protecting his future wife, the pathetic man aggressively demanded that she take the full blame for the forged documents to save his own skin from prison. Discovering his extreme cowardice permanently shattered her romantic illusions while making her realize the terrifying reality of facing severe felony charges for a malicious crime she did not mastermind. Agreeing to her desperate plea for a secret daytime meeting, I arrived at a deserted suburban park where she was already sitting nervously on a weathered wooden bench. Sierra hastily pulled a smartphone from her designer purse while sobbing uncontrollably as she handed me the device containing dozens of highly incriminating text messages. She frantically explained how the digital conversations explicitly detailed his exact instructions regarding the fraudulent paperwork while proving his undeniable role as the primary architect. Looking up at me with puffy red eyes, she pleaded for my mercy while desperately attempting to distance herself from his disastrous financial schemes. I swear I did not know the actual severity of this situation because he completely deceived me too. Please just spare me from the legal consequences. Sierra begged desperately. Refusing to let her dramatic display of tears manipulate my judgment, I coldly accepted the illuminated screen displaying the undeniable proof of his malicious intent. Staring down at her with an entirely emotionless expression, I felt absolutely zero sympathy for the woman who originally planned to enjoy my stolen inheritance. I knew she only decided to betray him because the looming threat of a lengthy prison sentence finally outweighed her desire for a lavish lifestyle. You simply chose the wrong side to support, but providing this concrete evidence will ultimately save you from wearing a prison uniform right alongside them. I replied, devoid of any warmth. Without wasting another precious second, I rapidly transferred every single invaluable screenshot from her device directly into my encrypted email folder to ensure their permanent preservation. I immediately forwarded the comprehensive digital archive to Harrison so he could firmly attach the undeniable proof to our rapidly expanding criminal prosecution file. Providing the seasoned lawyer with these explicit written confessions created an absolutely airtight case that completely destroyed any pathetic attempts by Jared to deny his guilt. The overwhelming mountain of evidence guaranteed that neither my brother nor my parents could ever lie their way out of the impending judicial nightmare awaiting them. Securing this decisive tactical victory courtesy of Sierra meant the fake alliance constructed by those greedy individuals had officially collapsed entirely from the inside out. Deprived of their stolen financial resources, the toxic family members rapidly turned against one another like starving animals trapped inside a steadily shrinking metal cage. I later learned through mutual acquaintances that they were viciously tearing each other apart while screaming bitter accusations across the empty hallways of the house. Facing the terrifying reality of their bank accounts being completely frozen, their absolute despair magnified the intense mutual resentment they previously hid behind fake smiles. The crushing pressure of the incoming legal eviction combined with the catastrophic financial squeeze effectively destroyed their pathetic family dynamic long before the authorities ever arrived. 6 months later, I calmly stood watching the sturdy-souled sign planted firmly on the green front lawn of the suburban Overland Park property. The righteous consequences finally crashed down upon the villains when the local court officially convicted my parents, alongside Jared, for severe trust fund fraud. Facing strict legal probation for their malicious actions, they were permanently stripped of their fake social reputation, while their financial credit records were completely destroyed. The presiding judge showed absolutely zero leniency toward their pathetic tears after reviewing the undeniable digital evidence provided by the terrified former bride. Because I permanently severed their primary source of financial support, they were entirely unable to afford their mounting legal fees or basic daily expenses. The crushing reality of utter bankruptcy eventually forced them to immediately relocate into a dark, incredibly shabby boarding house located across the state. Consequently, the extravagant destination wedding originally planned between Jared and Sierra was officially canceled in absolute public disgrace, without a single stolen dollar remaining. The toxic family dynamic completely imploded as they spent their miserable days bitterly blaming each other for the devastating loss of their luxurious lifestyle. Regarding my own personal healing journey, I decisively cut off all remaining communication with those toxic individuals without ever offering a single word of reconciliation. Harrison ensured the restraining orders remained firmly in place to legally prevent them from ever attempting to contact me for future financial bailouts. I strategically utilized the fully recovered trust fund money to make highly intelligent investments that successfully opened a brand new chapter of absolute freedom. Purchasing a beautiful modern home under my own name finally provided the profound sense of safety I had desperately craved since my early childhood. Walking away from that terrifying nightmare forever allowed me to finally build a peaceful life completely free from their manipulative exploitation alongside their psychological abuse. Stepping into my newly decorated living room, I realized that surviving their deceitful betrayal ultimately transformed me into an incredibly resilient, independent woman. The painful memory of freezing on that wooden hallway floor no longer haunted my dreams, but